When I got here on Saturday, I got an email from Anna saying I don't have a definite title for your presentation yet. So I looked at the website and I saw Luis had something about working smarter, so I figured let's do the same thing. Like he'll talk about email, and I'll talk about something called MicroNarratives. And when I first sent the presentation around, or put it on our social platform, I should say, in our own company, the feedback, the title of the presentation was, I'm not sure what the first words were, but it was about using narratives. And the feedback I got from a colleague said, maybe you should call it micro-narratives, otherwise people will think you're talking about blogging. So this isn't about blogging, this is about micro-narratives. I think I can skip this slide in that sense because Samuel did a nice introduction of me. What I'll be talking about today is the narrative, the micro-narrative. If you look at human history, I think the key thing that humans do when they share knowledge, or when they do anything basically, is that they tell each other stories. And the nice thing about telling each other stories is the fact that you add context to the stuff you're talking about. And you can see it when you tell your kid, don't ride your bike there. They won't go, okay. And they go, why? So you have to explain why you can't ride your bike there. And it's really interesting, we did that a little while ago. My wife and I told our kids how we met each other. And you can see they really enjoy that story because it gives context about what the relationship was about, how it started, where you come from. So these stories, they're really powerful things. And I think if you look at it, the powerful thing about this whole conference is the fact that we're making, or the organization is making, tool vendors actually talk in stories. There are stories about this real company that you fit your tool in. So stories are they're very, very important in our lives. And if you look at the cabling story, we see Anne McClear, and she writes a whole bunch of blogs. And one of the blogs is that there's a new factory opening in Turkey, and she writes a blog that she's visiting Portugal. And basically what Anne is saying is she can't find any information in the company about what happened, 7 years, or in 2001, when the factory in Portugal was opened. So she needs to resort to find people that can tell her the story, the narrative, what happened. She needs real people to do that. Apparently there's no file structure or folder or whatever that contains the information about opening the factory in Portugal that she can use for a plan to open the factory in Turkey. But that's quite an interesting giving. And when Anna did the presentation about cabling this morning, there was another thing about the fire. How do you think they'll go back to figure out what happened, why the fire started? There's no files probably they can look at. No, they'll probably have to talk to the people that were doing the engineering. So it's a lot of what we do in companies is about stories. Then there's this phenomenon when we collaborate we can call documents. And just sort of to put things in a very short perspective, this is the history of what happened to documents. And in the old days, really, 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 really important stuff was committed to clay tablets. This is an example of it. And I think the 10 Commandments is a nice example of it. And I did a little work on Wikipedia to figure out, did they have any libraries back then? And how heavy would they have been? Because storing all these. And I found out that 1,000 years before Christ, there was a library, I forgot where it was, it's a difficult name, and they stored 30,000 of these things in there. 30,000. So that sounds, I think, to me that sounded like a lot of clay tablets. But how many, if you think about the future times, how many documents do you think would be on this machine? How many clay tablets? Probably 30,000 or something like that. So that's a really interesting thing that's happened. And basically from the clay tablets we moved, we had some innovation, and somebody said, well, why don't we write on paper? It's a lot lighter, you can carry it with you. So we did, people started writing on paper, and what happens with innovation, or with technology innovation usually, is that it explodes the usage. So instead of making better use of basically what we did, because it was lighter, we could carry more with us. So we created more documents that were on paper. And I think the same trend went forward when we moved to the machine. And basically on the machine, I think it's, when you think about it, it's quite funny, but we used to write on paper, and now we look at a screen, and there's a paper on the screen, and we're typing it. It's funny if you think about it in that sense. So this is the history of how we work. And yeah, let's leave it at that. And to support all that work, you know, when we started with the papers and all the papers we were carrying, we needed tools. So we got these filing cabinets and things in libraries where you could stick stuff. And basically, if you look at collaborative innovation over a whole bunch of years, we went from steel filing cabinets to Microsoft folders or other brands. Which, again, if you look at the content, I don't find very innovative in that sense. But what's interesting is, so we're sticking all these millions of documents, we're still sticking them in files. And if I come into this company, the biggest thing I hear, I guess, is people can't find stuff anymore. And that's not even talking about the context. So going back to cabling, they're opening this new factory, and their factories have big machines that jump up and down, so their floors need to be really strong. And Mr. McPlan, Phil McPlan, head of projects, is responsible for the whole building, and he's looking into the floor that needs to be put into the factory. So he asks around and says, so where's the project information? Where did you, you know, from the Portugal thing, where are all the documents? So somebody says, okay, there's a old project, team site or whatever you call it, or shared folder, and this is what he finds. And this is, I don't know about you, but this is quite typical for how people work in organizations. So here's the document that was sort of, that led to the final specifications for the floor. So this is what we'll see in inboxes. So we have this 0.1 version, and somehow this became 0.2. Probably this became 0.2 because I won't email. People say, what do you think? Well, I think this version isn't right. I think it should be that. Or talking to the vendors or talking to the market. So a lot of contextual information was added, and 0.2 was created. Well, I don't have to go through the whole series. But actually, so if people look at these things, and even in my own company, we have a whole bunch of these things, the most people don't have a clue why you go from here to there. And then there's this one. There's 3 documents that he finds. The top one is the contract with McBuild. That's the company they hired to build the floor. There's a liability and damage to McBuild concrete floor, which is where they say McBuild is liable because the floor broke. And then there's the specs thing again. And the funny thing is, when he opens them, he finds the specs here are different than the specs in the contract with McBuild. And there was damage, but it doesn't say anywhere why there was damage. So we have all these documents in our companies, but we don't know why things happen. And I guess that's actually the most important thing we need to know. Why do we need these? Why do we need these specs? Why were the specs changed? Why is McBuild being sued? And all that stuff is gone up in air because people that left the company and deleted their email boxes, or because stuff was done in meetings and they didn't put them in the folders here. So the crucial information in our companies to do things in the future basically goes up in air. And I think, that coming to the point I'm going to make, is this is, in my mind, a key thing that social technology offers us. It brings to us the best of both worlds. And this is a very shabby looking thread, but because there's all sorts of vendors here, I figured I'd keep it in the middle. But basically this is a project being worked on. And it starts off saying, here's version 1 of, and this is a different thing, this is not cabling, of our deliverable, and you see why I'm a hashtag fetishist. You see a lot of hashtags in there, but maybe about that later. Here's a deliverable, this is what it is. Please give me feedback. And please review by May 5th, blah, blah, blah. But basically what happens in this whole thing is that people are giving him feedback. But everybody's doing this in the thread. So all the feedback that he gets on the document is here, and it's nice, and it's in one order. And you can read it from the top to the bottom. Also, you don't get 5 times the same feedback through mail from other people. It's just, If Bob has said it here, it's good. You don't have to repeat it. You can also have suggestions to, for example, what his manager does here is say you need to reach out to operational risk because they may have some issues with it. And when he does, he says, yeah, they did have issues with it. And coming back to knowledge management, he adds hashtag lessons learned, and it's on the list of the guy that puts the lessons learned together. So what you create, if you work out loud on this thing, if you create narratives for your projects and attach the documents to the narrative instead of making the documents leading, is you get stories. You get stories in your organization that actually are searchable and that explain why things happened in the past. If this would have happened with the factory floor, it would have probably explained that the first specifications were sent out to all the builders, that one builder came back and said, we have a lot cheaper way of performing these tasks with you, and all that information would be in the thread and it would be readable from a plan. So if you do this, you create a history. You can go back, read how things happened. If you go on our own social platform, you go to any client thread or any project thread, you can start at the top and go to the bottom and see exactly read what happened. So if you talk about onboarding or about why decisions were made, that's very helpful. And we have threads at one of our clients that are 450 comments long. These things go over 2 years. But it's creating those stories again that we humans can connect to. It's more transparent. It's, if you also log why decisions were made in there, that becomes clear instead of being in back rooms or decisions between people. You get more alignment. If you work out loud like this, and I say I've created this document or I'm doing this presentation, other colleagues will chip in. They'll say, hey, here's a nice picture. Or here, this is how I should do it. So if you work out loud, you get more people working towards the same goal. You capture the knowledge automatically. I hear a lot of people talking here about knowledge management, knowledge capture. And one of the things I've learned in my career is that a lot of the knowledge management initiatives that we've seen, they're out of the flow. They're not part of our work. When you've completed your project, you need to type your knowledge management things, or you need to mark things as being knowledge. If you work in this way, knowledge becomes a byproduct of what you do. You do your work, and by recording it on the platform, your knowledge is shared. Decisions are shared. So the knowledge capture becomes a byproduct, and it becomes part of your work, which makes it a lot easier to adopt. The support thing, what we do, for example, in our own company, is that if I need help on anything, I use the hashtag #helpneeded, and we've agreed with the whole company that every day everybody presses that hashtag, and you just get a list of all the stuff that people need help on. And if people can help you, they comment and say, this is what I do, here's some information. This is a very fast way of helping each other in that sense, and you get a lot of problems solved. And the interesting thing is, you can work like this in your project or with colleagues, but senior management can also work in this way. Senior management, instead of saying, hey guys, we're not doing too well, so we're going to lay off 250 people, without really explaining, people don't see that coming. They can also start talking about the problems that they're facing, the opportunities that they're seeing, and also work in threads like that. Which, what it does is it kickstarts a long change process where people get involved in what the senior leaders are doing. And what we see is that that really boosts engagement with the company, because people are becoming aware of the story that the whole company is engaged with. They become aware of the future of the company. And the third thing, I think the reason the narrative or telling stories has disappeared in companies for largely, is that these companies have become too big to deal with this kind of working. That's why we invented hierarchies, I guess. In the beginning of the last century, when the company started to get really big, we had communications problems. We got hierarchies, and we started to have documents that flowed up and down the chain, and we couldn't reach each other anymore with these stories. And I think what this technology brings is that brings back that power to us. Now a CEO or anybody in the company, if you find the right audience, you can reach 60,000 people, tell your story to them. So the barriers we had towards storytelling in the past, where companies became too big, they're gone. So we should go back to the narrative and start working in this way. Work out loud. That's it.